Ole Miss will blast the Florida Gators and make the playoffs. We have the answer key before Saturday's test.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, the most watched Ole Miss podcast out there. I am your host, Stephen Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports and a former staff member at Ole Miss. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network in America. On today's show, we're going to lock in our picks and props for the Ole Miss Rebels showdown with the Florida Gators and give you our final predictions for Saturday's game. Next, we'll highlight the key players to watch and discuss how Ole Miss can close the door and finish strong on this playoff run. But first, we're going to talk about Trinidad Chambliss, the secret ingredient who could finally unlock Ron Roberts' defense and going against Lane Kiffin's offense and help Ole Miss dominate the Gators from start to finish. All of this and more on today's Locked On Ole Miss podcast. Remember, we're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. A special hello to our everydayers and insiders who make the show what it is, and that is your team every single day. This is an interesting game because there's really no way you can talk about the Ole Miss Florida game and not mention what happened in Lexington, Kentucky just a week ago, a game which the Kentucky Wildcats did not punt the entirety of the game which the Florida Gators defense made Cutter Boley look like Peyton Manning. It is impossible to separate that from the Florida Gators defense. And this is a good Florida Gators defense. Like the ceiling and the floor of this team we have seen this year, with the Florida Gators taking apart the Texas Longhorns and the Florida Gators getting completely demolished by the Kentucky Wildcats. So which version of Florida are you likely going to get? Now, we talked with Brandon Olson from Locked On Gators on a crossover episode yesterday. And he mentioned that basically defense kind of feels done with DJ Lagway. They don't believe that the offense can score enough points to win the game. And because of that, they kind of let go of the rope against Kentucky. And I do think that Kentucky game was an outlier. I do. I'm not expecting the Texas-Florida to show up, but I do think that Kentucky game was an outlier. Kentucky on the availability, or Florida on the availability report this week, it's long. Again, both of the Wilsons are out. The best player that the Florida Gators really have that you need to concern yourself with is Jaden Baugh, who is a terrific football player. He's somebody that if you're not pre-portaling him right now, you're doing it wrong. So whenever you look at all that, you automatically feel like this Ole Miss team is going to win. But remember, this Ron Roberts defense kind of bottled up Jackson Dart a year ago in Gainesville. Well, the difference between this year's team and last year's team is actually pretty pronounced. Now, last year's team had first rounders all over the place. This year's team's better, legitimately better. And a lot of that has to do with Trinidad Chambliss. Now, he can't make the 25-yard in-route throws that Jackson Dart or Austin Simmons can make. He's not a first-round talent quarterback. But what he is an elite ball distributor. He is an excellent athlete, and he takes what the defense is willing to give him, because what got Ole Miss in trouble a year ago, other than the fact that they didn't really have a running game, is the fact that the defense could take away one person, and that would take away essentially the whole offense. There was no plan B for Ole Miss in the LSU game after Trey Harris got hurt. There was no plan B in the Florida Gators game after Trey Harris got hurt. It's interesting. Even against the Kentucky Wildcats, it was just, hey, let's force it into Trey Harris over and over again. Trey Harris fumbles one time, and that ends up being the undoing of an entire playoff season. The offense was very predictable in 2024. That isn't the case in 2025. You look at the box score in a game, you'll see the leading receiver has 5 catches, the second leading receiver 4, 2 or 3 players with 3 catches. It's the Mike Leach, RIP, spread the ball around balance theory, to where you want the players on your offense to get touches. And that allows the offense to kind of be protected from the defense taking away your best player. The fact that Ole Miss doesn't have a Trey Harris on this roster this year is a good thing. There was no purely alpha player on this roster. And because of that, because they were all 5 or 6 wide receivers with similar skill sets and similar talent bases, you can use them as you see fit. One game, Deshaun Stribling might be the leader. One game, Daquan Wright. One game, Caden Lee. One game, Deuce Alexander. Those players help Ole Miss kind of expand because this offense doesn't get as unlocked. And I think Trinidad Chambliss leads the SEC in yards per completion. The explosive plays are off the chart, and that helps a running back like Kewan Lacy, who's just honestly an elite pass protector, very hard to bring down. His future in Oxford is very, very high, honestly. 16 touchdowns on the year already. That ties the school record. He scores another one, he's going to have it all by himself. He is likely going to go over 1,000 yards this season. Not bad for a first-year starting running back transfer out of Missouri. So when you look at Trinidad Chambliss and the way he's able to spread the ball around, this offense is going to be more difficult to stop than it was a year ago. Everybody has figured that out, honestly. And if they haven't figured that out, they haven't been watching. So I expect Ole Miss to score some points in this game. North of 30, if tradition against the SEC teams that they have played is any indication. Even the good teams, Ole Miss is scoring more than 30 points this year against. And the defense is getting better and better and better. And when they play an opponent that is not a dominant rushing team, the 2 that they played was Arkansas, who is one of the most explosive teams in the entire country, and the Georgia Bulldogs, who runs the ball very well. If you've seen any games, you saw the physicality that they run the football. Florida can run power a little bit on you, but it's not like Georgia. And if you look at it statistically, you kind of match up pretty well with them as well. So I do not think that Florida is going to break 20 because they've only broke 20 against SEC teams twice this year. So I don't think Florida is going to break 20 points, and I think Ole Miss is going to score north of 30. So the question becomes, do you think Ole Miss is going to cover in this game? And the line moves up and down, and we'll talk about the prediction and the line and all of that. That is truly what is the question in this game. And when you look at all the circumstances around, the fan base is completely juiced up about this game. Not because of the Florida Lane stuff, not because Florida, it's because Ole Miss has a legit chance to make the college football playoff with the win. It doesn't matter if it was against the Citadel, doesn't matter if it was Arkansas, Florida, Mississippi State, it doesn't matter. The 10th win can happen on Saturday. It's on senior night. It's at home. Ole Miss is 21-1 in their last 22 games since 2023 in that building. And a win essentially gets you in the college football playoff, because all that's left is a road game against a Mississippi State team that might already have their 6th win. If you lose that game, you're losing to another bowl-eligible team. The Mississippi State loss actually would not be as bad as the Florida loss. This Florida game is a game that you need to win. And you would probably need to win going away, if we're going to be completely honest about it. But we'll see. With Texas and Oklahoma playing Georgia and Alabama, and upsets are going to happen all over the place because it always does. You have to protect yourself from being one of those teams that get upset. If you can do that, you're going to walk out of the gates on Saturday a happy person. And you're going to be starting to think about, hey, let's figure out what we're going to book the weekend of the 19th or 20th. I mean, heck, you just book it on the 19th or 20th or 18th. It's a 3-day minimum anyway. So why not set it up, go ahead and get it done if Ole Miss beats Florida? That's what I mean by this game feels like it should be a coronation from the fans. And that's a pretty cool thing. So we'll see exactly how that goes for Ole Miss and the Florida Gators. All right, we're going to take a look at a few players to watch for Saturday's game against the Florida Gators for the Ole Miss Rebels and start asking the question, could this be the Andrew Jones show against the Gators? Stick around. We'll talk about it next. It's almost the weekend. Time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you order, these players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it all down. For Ole Miss, Trinidad Chambliss delivered in a big way. He went 29 of 33 for 333 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's right. The threes are wild for Trinidad Chambliss against the Citadel in about a half of work. When the pressure was on, he came through, no hesitation, no delay. And if you've been paying attention week to week, his performance was not a fluke. Trinidad Chambliss is on a streak. And just like Trinidad Chambliss delivered for the Ole Miss Rebels, DoorDash delivers for your Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you can save every Saturday you order. Stack it all up all season, and you can save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. On Saturday, keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period runs through November 18th. Do us a favor, like, subscribe, and comment on the video. Subscribe to the podcast on whichever audio podcatcher you're listening to it on right now, and give it a 5-star review. It costs absolutely nothing, but it helps keep all of this free. And Locked On is getting ready to change the game yet again, all in the name of following your team. It's coming in December. More details as we have them. And thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network in America. That is a pretty cool feeling, and I'm excited to see exactly where it goes. Now, there are some players in this game that I'm going to be paying attention to, and they're going to be the benchmark players for how successful Ole Miss could be in this football game. Now, remember, Florida has some pretty good players on their team. They do. I mean, you can't get around it. You can't hit a 9-iron from down here in Florida and not hit a 4-star player. They're going to have talented players, but they are not a very good football team. And as you saw last week, they let go of the rope. Now, I don't think that Florida is going to let go of the rope like they did last week. I do not think it's going to be a situation to where there's a lack of pride. So we'll see. If you look at the reasons that I think Ole Miss is going to win the game, I think Ole Miss is going to start fast. I mean, that's all important to beating a Florida team that is on the ropes right now. You want to get them encouragement to let go of that rope and kind of use the Q word again. And like we talked about in the first segment, Trinidad Chambliss' distribution will be key, and his ability to play point guard in the offense will be massive for Ole Miss. I think that might be the biggest key in this game offensively is the distribution to 8-9 wide receivers in the game. And Kentucky ran for 233 yards by sticking to a physical run game. Seth McGowan had a really good game. I think Kewan Lacy can do a little bit of the same stuff. It's going to be a big run game. Be physical. Again, encourage the Q word. If you can do that, you will be all right. The players to watch in this game, pretty simple. Trinidad Chambliss, Kewan Lacy. We just talked about those two. Andrew Jones. This has a chance to be a big Andrew Jones game, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Trinidad Chambliss, though, despite not playing early in the year, did not play against Georgia State, only played about 4 minutes versus Kentucky, missed 2 full games. He's 169 at 264 for 2,356 yards, 13 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. If he played those 2 games, he is likely nearly 3,000 yards, leading the SEC in passing. And Lane Kiffin and the Ole Miss football staff put out a stat that they lead the nation in passing since the advent of helmet communication. That is a pretty cool thing to think about as well. But the Andrew Jones piece is something that is interesting to me. Andrew Jones kind of, if you think about it, kind of like Chris Paul last year, although it took a little bit longer for him to make his impact and his way onto the roster. It's interesting because Andrew Jones coming in, and he flashed a couple of times against the Georgia Bulldogs. Ole Miss's run defense got immediately better with the advent of Andrew Jones. TJ Daugherty became TJ Daugherty again. That linebacker that was next to TJ Daugherty. This run defense as a whole got better. And it also helps, honestly, especially with the athlete that Andrew Jones is, that the defensive line is getting better and better and better each and every single week, which means Andrew Jones isn't going to face as much traffic each and every week. And there's two offensive lines that do it a little bit differently, but these are both going to be big tests for Andrew Jones. Now, Jaden Baugh, we talked about in the early segment, he is the real one player from Florida that scares you. And scare might not be the right word, but he's the one player that you're paying attention to. He is like 4th or 5th in the Southeastern Conference in rushing. They line him up at wide receiver. They move him around. He's basically everything. With Trey Wilson, who caught a couple of touchdowns or caught a touchdown against Georgia. With Dallas Wilson, who just dominated Texas early in the year, being out, it becomes a who do you count on? Who do you trust type deal. And Florida's been leaning on Jaden Baugh, which means they're going to run the football, which Andrew Jones is best at, the athletic ability. And Florida, since Billy Napier got relieved, we talked to Brandon Olson from Locked On Gators yesterday. He talked about how this Florida team is going to more gap scheme runs now after Billy Napier got fired, instead of running the typical zone type stuff that they had been doing. And that's interesting, but that's also letting me know that they know that Jaden Baugh is the heart of their team. Now, the question becomes, which DJ Lagway you get? Because he threw 5 picks at LSU, threw 3 picks against Kentucky. So that's, Simpson County math tells me that's 8 right there. And he has 12 on the year. So the other games he threw 4. Which version of DJ Lagway do you get? Now, he wants to push the ball down the field. Who does he push the ball down the field to? How much can he be made to feel the crowd and the noise inside that stadium? How can you speed him up? Because at this point of the season and this point in his confidence, you can speed him up. Last year, when Ole Miss played Florida, DJ Lagway had a great game, but he was also extremely confident at that moment. The week before, he had just beaten LSU and threw like 3 touchdowns in the process. Against Ole Miss, he just fought off, avoided sacks. He was hard to bring down, and he completed a lot of off-platform throws that got first downs. It was actually a very impressive game from DJ Lagway. So Pete Golding has to figure out how to speed him up, because this year you can speed him up. And if you do that with the way that Ole Miss plays some complex coverages, when he throws you the ball, catch it. The last time that I said that, and it was real, was with Taylon Green when Arkansas came in and Ole Miss dropped 3 interceptions, and Arkansas had the ball at the very end with a chance to win the game. If he throws you the ball, catch it. Now, over the last 3 weeks, it's been a completely different story than the first part of the year. I think Ole Miss had gotten 2 turnovers and 5 sacks through the first 5 games of the year. But the last 3, they have 11 sacks, and they're turning the ball over there. I think there was 3 turnovers against South Carolina alone. So the defense feels like it's rounding into form. The question that I have is, how will Ole Miss stand up against a power running team? Because Florida, make no mistake, is going to try to want to run the football, just because their receivers are out and you're sitting there and having Jaden Baugh in the backfield as a player that you have to respect. So we'll have to see how the Ole Miss defense reacts. I think they'll be fine, but it is something to pay attention to. Anyway, in our final segment, we're diving into the picks and props for Ole Miss this Saturday and answering some big questions. Are we predicting the Rebels to cover the spread? All of this coming up next. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel. It's the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine those live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at an even bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team is making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. When you look at some leans and locks for this week's game, it's interesting because honestly, and this isn't an insult towards Florida or anything like that, but the uncertainty in this ball game makes it a little bit more like the Citadel than the week before against South Carolina because you don't know how it's going to play out. If Florida is engaged for 60 minutes, it's going to be a tight one-score type ball game. That's the way that most every game in this conference has been. But if Florida lets go of the rope like they did against Kentucky, it could get bad. And by bad, it could get really bad. So I started wondering about how I would look at this ball game, like what some of the picks and props that I'm looking at. I think the number I'm curious is Kewan Lacy north of 75 rushing yards, or maybe a Kewan Lacy with 2 touchdowns. Those are 2 props on that end. I think Trinidad Chambliss throwing for 300 yards and 50 yards rushing, that kind of makes sense a little bit. I think Florida making less than 20 points in the game, that is interesting as well. I do think when I put the final score up, it's an underplay. I think the over-under right now is at 53 points. And the line has gone down just a little bit to where Florida is now a 14.5-point underdog, still north of 2 touchdowns, but 14.5 over 15.5, that's not nothing. And when you look at it, the stats, and it's still 81% of the money is on Ole Miss and 73% of the bets are on Ole Miss. So we'll see exactly how it looks when it comes to FanDuel Sportsbook of what can happen. I'm curious of what Jaden Baugh will do. Will he have north of 75 yards rushing? I think if he gets north of 150, the game gets interesting. But if he's down around 75, that's manageable. DJ Lagway, what is his interception? What is his turnover number? Can Pete Golding kind of confuse the young quarterback? Can the crowd help speed him up? Because that's the underrated thing when it comes to games like this, is the crowd can speed up the opponent. And we'll see how it goes. I think Ole Miss has the better team. I think Ole Miss, the only way they can lose this game is that they help, essentially, which means turnovers, penalties, going forward on 4th down. I don't think you go forward on 4th down at any place on the field. 3 is plenty good enough in this ball game. But if you play clean, if you play energetic, if you play like you know what is on the line for this football team, because there's a ton of stuff on the line for this football team. There's real stakes for Ole Miss. There's not for Florida. There's real stakes for Ole Miss. Because if you win this game, you hit the magic 10-win mark that the college football playoff, everybody says it needs to be hit. You hit that. You have Mississippi State coming up. You're going to be a touchdown to a 10-point favorite in that ball game as well. 1 game to go, 2 weeks to play for if you handle the Florida Gators. If you can do that, you will be all right. If you can't, it gets scary, because the reality of this situation, if you were told that you were going to have to lose one of the 2 games left on your schedule, Mississippi State is the far better loss. For infinitely better loss. This Florida team has bottom of the SEC level right now about them. And if Florida gets beat by Ole Miss, all of a sudden they've got Tennessee the next week. 3-9's on the table for that football team. which is kind of funny thinking about all the preseason hype that happened with him and South Carolina's quarterback and all of that. All these, quote, experts coming up with that. So it's interesting. So I'm going to go with Ole Miss to cover the line. Ole Miss is going to cover the line. Ole Miss 34, Florida 17. And I think it's going to be a 34-10 that Florida scores late to make it a 30-17. I'm pretty convinced that Florida is going to get a late touchdown against the 2s or the 3s. But I think Ole Miss is going to get off to a quick start. They're going to kind of put Florida away. And we're going to move on to 2 weeks talking about the battle for the golden egg. And it should be a lot of fun. But 34-17 is my prediction for the game. Will it work out? Who knows? Anyway, thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we're the front door of Ole Miss. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. It helps the show, and it's absolutely free. Your support means the world to us. Thanks for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On SEC. Chris Gordy is breaking down the best conference in college sports, from the rivalries to the championship, every game in between. Find Locked On SEC on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hotty toddy, and remember, analytics are just the old English word that means bad football. We'll see you tomorrow.